Well, a lifelong supporter of the Democratic Party was lying on his deathbed when suddenly he asked to join the Republican Party. Well, why, asked his puzzled friend, are you going to do that? I mean, you're a Democrat through and through all your life. Why change now? And the man leaned forward and he said, well, he says, I would rather it was one of them that died than one of us. You know, we all have our political opinions, we all have our affiliations, we all have our preferences, we all have our various and subtle things that go on in the context of those things. And I think that all of the differences that we share are often what makes life so interesting. It makes it interesting to run into people that have differing opinions because you have something to discuss and talk about and even debate if that's something you enjoy doing. And it's what I find is most profound and most interesting is that we are able to hold those differences. We're able to be in the context of those differences and still be in a loving community together. That we are still able to come together and to be present with each other and to be able to love each other and experience this life the way it is, knowing those things. I have a friend that I've talked about in Phoenix that he's my big political opposite. And so we engage in all these amazing emails back and forth. And he's very articulate and he does his research. I mean, he's retired and I'm not. So he gets a chance to do all this research. He does all this research and he sends me stuff. And one of the things that I like about it is it forces me to really think. It forces me not to just to live on the surface, but I have to really kind of go down a little bit deeper and really think through some of the things that I believe and some of the thoughts that I express. And it doesn't necessarily change what I think, but it makes me understand more why I am where I'm at. And you know, when we are in these email exchanges, it's relatively combative, but when we're together, it's very friendly. And so I guess that's kind of the persona that we take up in these experiences. Now, what I have noticed over the period of time is that our differences are not about the problems that exist in the world. In other words, that we mostly agree on the things that exist in the world that need attention, that need energy, that need to be looked at or dealt with or to be embraced. We tend to mostly agree on those things probably 95% of the time. What we disagree on is how those things need to be dealt with. In other words, we disagree on the process or on what needs to happen or what needs to change or this, that, and the other thing. And so I think that's true, that most of us generally agree on the issues that exist in the world. You know, when we look around the world, that we agree on the issues, but we differ in how those issues should be addressed. And I'm not here to talk about the issues or the problems that need to be solved or how to solve them. That's not my job. But what I'm here to talk about is how we engage in a process of giving to those things that exist in the world that we see sort of beyond our own little confined world to the big picture. How it is that we give to the big picture that's going on in the world. How do we engage in as a part of our giving consciousness in that way in the world? Because we're dealing basically with some of the ideas out of the book, The Power of Giving. And in The Power of Giving, they talk about giving to the big picture and some of the issues and concerns that exist around that. You know, we know that there are issues around, every one of us deals with the cost of health insurance. We deal with the cost or the issues in dealing with all of the medical stuff. We all know that we have challenges and issues and concerns and so on and so forth. We deal with issues of homelessness. We look around and we see, you know, all the homeless people that we encounter or run into. We deal with issues of poverty. Poverty has always been around us and in the world. We deal with things like runaway teens and drugs and other challenges that show up in the world. Those things are there and they're present all the time in our life. We all deal with climate change. Whether we agree that climate change is occurring, if a tornado comes through, we all know that we just had climate change. And so we deal with the effects of whatever climate change might show up in the context of where it is we are and how we're living. So when we are giving for the big picture, The first thing that we must do is to sit down and begin to look at those things which we feel passionate about. What are the things in the world that you feel are huge issues in the world that are important to you, that are something that grabs your attention, whatever they might be, whether it be Darfur or whether it be some foreign country or whether it be something going on in this reality, whatever social dynamic that's happening that you feel connected to is where we begin in terms of looking at how we give to the big picture. And when we identify our passion, whatever that is, because passion is the most important thing in the context of giving to the big picture. So when we identify our passion and start entering into the process of doing something about it, we then put ourselves in a position to become vulnerable. And here's the issue that I want to focus on today. We become vulnerable about the politics that show up in the context of us trying to give something good and to make a difference in the world. A Brazilian priest who worked with his country's poorest people said, "When I gave food to the poor, they called me a saint. When I asked why the poor were hungry, they called me a communist." And that's the issue that we all have to deal with. The perceptions that show up in the minds of others as we engage in issues in the world. The difference between giving food and solving the world's problem is the difference between giving to the person in front of us or engaging ourselves in the big picture of giving to the world. And we must be willing and ready and able to deal with the issues that show up around that process. Because in every circumstance or situation that is a big picture thing, we deal with entrenched interests. We deal with people and circumstances that have been built up and show up around the issues that are showing up in the world that have a reason to be engaged in those and are threatened whenever we or ever some other thing comes into the picture trying to make a difference. Jesus ran into that all the time, and I think when you look at what it is that shows up, if you look back and look at what Jesus did, particularly in Matthew 12, which is a really, I think, good example of the consciousness that needs to show up in our process of giving. So Jesus is doing exactly what he needed to do when he allowed his disciples to eat on the Sabbath. Now, this is a big issue. It says, at the time Jesus went through the grain fields on the Sabbath, his disciples were hungry. Now, it doesn't say how long it had been since they eaten, but the presumption is, from my point of view, is that it had probably been a while, that they must have been really hungry. They must have been maybe gone a couple of days without eating. I don't know, but it would seem that that would be the case, that they were hungry. And so they began to pluck heads of grain and to eat. Now, I don't know how many of you have ever plucked the head of a grain and tried to eat it, but that isn't an easy thing to eat. You know, wheat kernels are not easy to eat. So you know that they were very hungry. So they plucked grains of head to eat. But when the Pharisees saw it, now here's the Pharisees. The Pharisees are the entrenched interests. They're the ones that sort of hold the space for what's going on around the Sabbath. They hold the context of the law. So the Pharisees see this, and they said to him, "Look, your disciples are doing what is not lawful to do on the Sabbath. Look at this. You're not supposed to be doing this." And he said to them, "Have you not read what David did when he was hungry, and those who were with him? How he entered the house of God and ate the bread of the presence, which it was not lawful for him to eat, nor for those who were with him, but only for the priests?" So he went back into Scripture and he talked about some circumstance or issue that showed up in the life of King David, and where he had to actually step outside the context of, quote, the law.